fairly common question I've gotten on my channel is, what EV would you get if Tesla wasn't an option? Obviously, I'm a pretty big Tesla fan. I love the software, I love the autonomous driving features, the charging network, but there's a lot of great alternative EV startups now, and there's a lot more EVs hitting the road to compete with Tesla. And I have to admit, the one that has come the closest to making me second guess my order absolutely has to be Aptera, which hasn't delivered a product to consumers yet, but they're in the gamma stage of prototype production, which they're targeting first deliveries to be by the end of this year. They're a startup, so probably don't hold too much weight in their timelines. Even big major companies like Tesla can't stick to their timelines, but there's a couple of primary things that Aptera has going for them that has definitely grabbed my attention, and it's why I'm monitoring their brand very, very closely, because if they are actually able to succeed and start delivering these incredible vehicles to consumers who get to ride in them and drive them around, and we see the watt hours per mile, it absolutely may change a lot of our EV ownership plans. That's all I'll say for now. But the first and probably biggest thing Aptera has going for them is just an insane amount of efficiency. So we have on order a Model 3 rear-wheel drive with lithium iron phosphate, which is actually the most efficient vehicle of any kind that you can buy brand new right now. I think there was technically some standard range Model 3s from a couple of years ago that had slightly better miles per gallon equivalents, but those are no longer available new. And there's some other EVs like Lucid that come very, very close to beating the Model 3, but because they insist on having, you know, an over 500 mile range, that means that they have to hog around this giant battery pack, which makes the vehicle very, very heavy. And even though Lucid has developed a very compact and super efficient powertrain, a lot of those efficiency gains get eaten up by the inefficient size of the battery pack, which, yeah, having over 500 miles of range is cool and nice, but when you're charging well over $100,000 for the vehicle, that efficiency gain isn't very affordable or practical. And then, of course, Lucid is trying to lean even heavier into being a luxury vehicle, a luxury brand, which to me is quite unfortunate, because the main advantage I could think of when developing a super efficient EV with a powertrain that's just able to sip energy very, very barely on great distances, that should allow you to use smaller battery packs to go the same distance as the most popular EVs out there. Enter Aptera. That's exactly what they're doing, using smaller battery packs to achieve great range, which means they can prioritize affordability and scalability a lot more. That's my next biggest favorite thing about Aptera, is they're able to make a design that is focusing on scale primarily. If you follow any of the interviews and webinars that Aptera has done, they talk a lot about how the body composites they're designing, and of course working directly with Sandy Munro, is allowing them to reduce complexity, reduce the total number of parts required. Heck, even to the point that the vehicle has 3 wheels instead of 4 helps reduce complexity, and the main body of the vehicle is essentially this assembly of 4 main parts. And that, of course, saves on weight, which increases the efficiency. And while I have a hard time believing that Aptera is gonna stay true to their targeted pricing, especially with the inflationary environment we're in right now, I wouldn't be shocked if they announce price increases in the near-term future. But even with some pretty massive price increases, they would be drastically undercutting the competition in regards to the total range these vehicles are targeting. Right now, Aptera is saying they're gonna build the 400-mile range variant first, which is already quite an accomplishment in itself. You don't see that many EVs out there achieving 400 miles of range, but what's even more rare and basically impossible is finding a 400-mile range EV for a little over $40,000. That type of efficiency and that type of affordability is unmatched in the EV space, and I don't think Aptera gets enough credit or enough attention for achieving these goals, because when you get watt hours per mile that low, it's not only cool for, okay, you're using a smaller battery pack and you can ramp up production faster, or you can achieve less watt hours per mile. It's not just some tech spec thing. What's actually more important is the total cost of ownership. If you're like Aptera and you can achieve basically 300 miles per gallon equivalent, which is twice the efficiency of the Model 3 we're going to be picking up in a couple months, that means that it requires less money to travel the same distance with that vehicle. And therefore, even if $40,000 or $30,000 seems like a lot to you for a vehicle that only sits 2 people, the break-even point is going to be half of that of another $40,000 or $50,000 EV, because the cost of energy to take that vehicle on a 1,000 mile road trip or just 1,000 miles of your daily commute for a month, you're going to be spending half as much money with the Aptera Aptera. So that's why I think, especially with their base option targeting around a $26,000 starting price, which I still have a hard time wrapping my brain around how they're going to do that, but I believe the profitability of that vehicle is going to be a lot more achievable than, say, the Chevy Bolt selling for $26,000, because the Aptera is only going to require a 25 or 26 kilowatt hour battery pack. That's like less than half the size of a lot of the most popular EVs selling right now. So the total cost to build that vehicle is likely also to be close to half or substantially less than a lot of these EVs that are selling. So Aptera is nearing the cheapest cost of ownership of any vehicle out there if you consider they're pushing for solar, because that makes a whole lot more sense on their vehicle because of how much energy it consumes per mile. That's when covering a vehicle with solar cells actually starts to make a big impact, because, you know, you could slap a bunch of solar on a Model 3 or a Model Y right now, but you're really only going to get maybe 10, 15 miles of range out of that per day, which is nice and kind of supplemental charging, and I wouldn't be against it. But with an Aptera consuming 100 watt hours per mile, that's when you start to see like 30 to 40 miles of range per day, which is actually beating the average daily driving commute for a lot of customers out there. So theoretically, you're getting to the point where you might actually start to pay next to nothing to power this EV. It can charge itself if you live in a sunny climate, and then you're not even plugging in, and your electric bill at home is not even going up. You're not having to pay for DC fast charging like you are most other EVs. And even if you do go on a road trip with an Aptera and you need to fast charge with it a couple times on the trip, because obviously there are certain days in the year where a lot of people drive more than 40 miles on a charge, but on those days you'll be paying less than half the price what other EVs will be paying. So I'm very excited for Aptera to start delivering, because once we start seeing like the 10-year ownership cost of an EV that's able to charge itself through the sun, the maintenance is basically going to be windshield wiper fluid and tires, which there's not even 4 tires to maintain like there is on other EVs. And because the weight is closer to 2,000 pounds, I don't think these tires are going to wear out as quickly as they do with, you know, 3 to 4 or 5,000 pound EVs that are pretty common, with Lucid weighing over 5,000 pounds and the Model S or Model 3s weighing over 4,000 pounds. And while I'm a huge fan of Rivian, and I think their pickup truck is awesome and has a ton of cargo space and a ton of cool features, the price is very high, higher than I'll ever be able to afford. And not only that, the efficiency is pretty low compared to other EVs out there, which means the cost of ownership of that truck is going to be a lot higher than a traditional Tesla, which will probably cost half the price to charge on a great road trip. And with the Aptera, it's going to be another big step change on top of that, probably a quarter of the cost to go 1,000 miles than a Rivian. And that R1T is weighing over 7,000 pounds, so the amount of tire tread and tire maintenance is going to be a bit higher with that truck. So I get that they serve different markets and different purposes, but a lot of the time when we're driving, it's just me and my wife, and we live in a very sunny climate. So I feel like the Aptera is being specifically designed and pitched as a perfect vehicle for some people like us. And sure, there's times where we drive with more than 2 people in the car, and that's when having the Model 3, having a very efficient sedan is going to be the best cost-effective solution, because it's going to consume very little energy per mile and still have some extra storage space and some extra seats. But for that 80 to 90% of the time that it's just us driving around, or just one of us driving around, the cost of ownership of that vehicle is going to be impossible to beat. And the fact that it has such a low starting price means that we're talking about potentially the cheapest vehicle to own in the world. And of course, there's no emissions involved. It's very good for the environment, and it doesn't require that big a battery pack to go very, very far on a trip. So Aptera prioritizing the efficiency, which matters a ton to me, and the affordability and the manufacturing ability is kind of all the stuff that I love when it comes to EV adoption. You know, how quickly can we ramp these up? How efficient can this vehicle be, which makes it far more affordable and pretty much allows us to accelerate the transition faster, because it means that the vehicle requires less energy to consume. And especially having a vehicle that's producing and harnessing its own energy, it doesn't need a house to supply it power or a fast charger. That's a game changer in itself. So that's why I'm comfortable saying if Tesla didn't exist, I would be holding out all hope for Aptera to hit the market as soon as possible. And once Aptera start delivering, definitely expect me to cover them more closely, and I would be very much interested in owning one once they're available. So all of that excitement, and I didn't even get to mention that, yeah, they also want to design one that's under $50,000 and goes 1,000 miles on a charge, which is just insanely absurd. Even if they don't hit those numbers, like in their 30% off, Imagine there being a vehicle that can go 700 miles on a charge, and it costs less than $50,000. Like, that's insane. That's absurd. So by far my favorite EV startup, and I hope a lot of you got interested or excited in this brand as well. Definitely check out their YouTube channel because they're also very vocal and very quick to answer people's questions. I love the coverage of the research and development phase that they're in right now, and all of the interviews they do, and they'll answer as many questions as possible in regards to people's safety concerns, because it's actually going to be a bit safer than you would assume. How much storage space these vehicles have, and the emphasis on software when it comes to the interior and that kind of thing. They've sold me on the idea, and now it's just a matter of working with Sandy Munro and bringing these vehicles into mass production. So if you are interested in reserving an Aptera before price hikes hit, feel free to use the referral code down in the description to get $30 off. Even though this is not a sponsored video, anybody can use that referral code. You can refer people yourself if you want to. And thanks again to everyone supporting the channel over on Patreon. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So take care. Have an excellent rest of your day.